Many people have been quick to tell me that my custom Space Marine lore is quote-unquote non-canonical or simply too silly. With that in mind, I've decided to make a pivot to a faction that uncharacteristically allows Warhammer fans to have a good time. The Orks. This is Pots and Pans, an orc who learned everything he knows about torture from the study of human texts. These books turned out to be cookbooks, basically making him a big green version of the dwarf from Dungeon Meshi. This is Pincushion, who got his name for obvious reasons. When his comrades don't feel like holding a knife or a war trophy, they'll simply stab it into the back of his flesh, knowing full well it'll be there when they go to check on him later. This is Warboss Wreck Havoc, spelled the way you think it is. He's never lost a hand-to-hand fight with his iconic bomber hammer, but he's also never fought one with it either. Despite this, he's confident that he can win 100% of the fights he wages with this weapon. Technically, he's correct. It appears that my loyal viewers have found some entertainment with my custom orc lore, and now the good people are yearning for more. Fortunately for you, more is a trademark of orcish physiology. More bodies, more violence, more Dakar. This is Kingpin, whose original war boss once bore a mighty iron crown. Kingpin decided to one-up him with a mighty crown of his own, and he can only assume the war boss killed himself out of shame for having the inferior headpiece. In reality, the crown made him blind and lost, and he ended up accidentally wandering into the wrong orc clan, which is why he never saw the war boss or anybody else ever again. This is Jumper, who's a staunch advocate for replacing the orcs' reliance on promethium with green energy. Which of course is just regular promethium with little bits of orc ground into it, because orcs is the best, and make good fast juice go better. This is Warboss Wreck Havoc, who we met in the last video, but who we didn't meet was Todd. Todd is unusually creative for a Gretchen, and likes to fantasize about who his enemies are and what they might have been during their lives. This is of course moments before blasting them to pieces with the skull-mounted machine gun he's delightfully dubbed the Head Cannon. Sure, I could be using my narrative talents to write a book or something, but I'm making orcs, baby. This is Rue Brawl, a fashionable orc who loves to accessorize and bring a new meaning to the word slay. This is Grackle, and the eagle-eyed amongst you might notice there's two of him. These two orcs are near identical, but they've also never been in the same room as each other. This means that the War Clan thinks this is one guy who has a bad habit of forgetting previous conversations. And this is Sneaker, who refuses to give up his real name because he believes that will give other orcs power over him. But because everybody calls him Sneaker, that's functionally his name, and because he goes out of his way to hide it, everybody knows what it is. So, I don't know, man. If you want a faction whose philosophy makes sense, you'd be better off playing the Tyranids. I got recognized at the Warhammer store today, not by my face, mind you, but by the orcs that I had with me, proving that they are in fact more popular than I am. So here's more of them. This is Jumper, a storm boy in training. He has no idea that the rocket pack on his back has been out of fuel for some time because his natural jumping height is 12 feet. This is Clubber, who always complains he has no weapons for ranged combat. Sure, he has a heavy bolter stolen from a Chaos Space Marine strapped to his back, but the device is so goth he assumes it's some kind of decorative tombstone, and carries it with him as a trophy of war. And this is Mechanus. Orcs are famously incapable of kindness, but Mechanus has been known to speak kindly and passionately. However, he only talks this way to his Project Car. This is the car, by the way. People have been clamoring for my next orc lore video, but the problem is I only really have one orc left to make a video about. So I'm gonna do my best to make an entertaining video about just one guy. I want it understood that I think this is a very bad idea, Harden explained as he strode through the lower decks of the ship. You wouldn't be the only one, my lord, Captain Cypress added, her breath wheezing as she struggled to match the gait of the Astartes. Throne, even the Admiral tried to get it to talk, but it wouldn't speak to him at all. The two humans, if Harden as a hulking Astartes could even be called that anymore, strode down the walkways of the Fist of Peace, a humble warship holding little more than a few hundred guardsmen and a handful of Harden's battle brothers. It was a journey that would have left the Imperial Guard captain more than winded, even if she wasn't trying to keep pace with a Space Marine. Even outside of his battle plate, it was as simple as a mental training exercise for Harden, a comparison that wasn't far from reality, given his approach towards one of his sworn enemies. An enemy that he would have to talk to, of all things. I mean, I think they shouldn't even be on this ship to begin with, Hardin clarified, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Why we have an Ork in Imperium custody is one thing. Why we're even considering talking to it is beyond even the Emperor's understanding, I'd wager. Well, you know how those adepts get. They're always pestering us for more research samples. And to find a greenskin as intact as this, well, it was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. So we were planning to dissect them, and now we seriously believe they have credible intelligence on missing Imperial officers. Even a Tyrannid would try to bluff their way out of a death sentence. I would have assumed this tactic was obvious. Even a what, my lord? Never you mind, muttered the Space Marine. The main holding cells of the Fist weren't designed to hold such monstrous cargo. There was a secondary cell block, colloquially dubbed the Pandora, that was fit to hold a single combatant of a more considerable size. It had been built at the behest of Brother Leguizamo, who'd always wanted to take out his wrath on a captured heretic Astartes. Hardin had approved the construction of the chamber, if only for the fact he would have a space to imprison his battle brother should he ever again attempt to requisition Imperial resources for other personal means. As the door to the cell block slid open, the sight inside was monstrous. The towering Ork stood nearly as tall as the Astartes, even as he hunched over the thick, glassy barrier he was contained behind. They were shirtless, wearing only a pair of black leather trousers and steel-capped boots. Half of their face was covered in a steel shell, clearly some kind of ramshackled bionic enhancement holding the alien's brain in place. They had their face pressed up against the barrier, scratching a black claw against the glass in a futile display of boredom. "There he is," the Ork bellowed, thumping his fist against the glass. "I don't know why you thought you could fool me before with that tiny Yumi. This lad's clearly the big boss around here." Hardin shot a glance towards Cyprus. He wanted to talk to the boss, but he refused to speak with Admiral Halen, the captain muttered. I don't think his orcish worldview would let him believe that someone so short could be in any position of power. Hardin stared back at the Ork, the dim lights of their cell offset by the shimmering lights of the warp cast through the porthole behind them. Any lesser mortal would have been driven mad by the constant sight of the Empyrean, but the Ork was either immune to its influence, or simply didn't notice it was there. "I'll make this brief," Hardin barked, clearly holding back disdain in his voice. "But first, you will identify yourself." The Astartes didn't want to give the creature the respect that a name would accommodate, but he knew that the Orks were proud creatures. Simply referring to them as Ork probably would have only boosted their resolve. "The name's Boom Box," Boom Box declared. "The baddest boy of the Tatterats. Well, I am now, given that you slaughtered the rest of my warband. Good crumping you lot did, by the way." Hardin sneered. A sign of respect from a creature such as this was the greatest of insults. "I do not have time for your petty words. You claim to have intelligence on missing Imperial officers. You will give us this information now, or we will see to your execution immediately." Boombox laughed. "You think I was born yesterday, do you? If I tell yous what I know, you'll just execute me anyways. I don't have to tell yous nothing." Cyprus gulped. Boombox was correct in that assumption, and there was nothing that she or the Imperium of Man could or would provide the Ork in return. She suddenly realized that securing the Ork's intelligence had been a doomed affair from the start, and she had used the situation to pull a Space Marine away from his duties. Hardin grimaced. "Excellent. So this has been the waste of time that I assumed it was. Very well. I'll send some Infernus troops to roast you alive in your cells shortly. Goodbye, Boombox." The Ork chuckled as the Astartes turned his back. You wouldn't care for what I've got anyway," Boombox spat, waving their hand from the glass. "All I've got is rumours and stories and the like anyways. Nobody you'd care about neither. Just some git they call Vex." Hardin stopped at the threshold of the door. It wasn't so much stopping as it was freezing dead. The Astartes stood motionless, before his head slowly began to turn. "Yeah,
Anastasia, or something like that. They're not even one of the big uns like you, neither, Boom Box sighed, scratching stray particles from beneath their claws. Just some tiny Yumi. They ain't worth nothing to nobody. Especially not to someone like you. A shuddering crack filled the room. Captain Cypress stifled a gasp. She had barely seen the Space Marine move his legs, let alone his fist that smashed against the glass of the cell. Tell me everything you know, came the command of First Company Captain Hardin Vex. There was a silence for a time. I know you try and talk to her, Space Marine, Boombox replied, his voice suddenly empty of its orcish enthusiasm. In those little psychic messages you know you're not supposed to send. Even though she never responds, you always feel like somebody's listening. That's because I'm listening, Space Marine. I've been listening this whole time. Hardin didn't say a word. He just stared at the alien, his face stoic and furious. His fist pressed deeper and deeper into the glass of the cage, the only force in the universe preventing him from throttling the orc with his bare hands. Do you feel that, Space Marine? I know it's not fear. Your kind had that removed a long time ago. But there's something there, isn't there? An absence. It's a hole where fear should be. And even though you can't feel it, you know deep down that you should. Your kind took that fear from you, and they took something from me, too. Without breaking the contact of their eyes, the orc gingerly clasped the steel adorning the top quarter of their skull. They removed it, with no snapping of wires or ripping of sinew. It simply slid off, revealing a perfectly circular chasm running the full depth of their skull. The base of the skin that would have once been an eyelid dropped low, accentuating the hole that carved clean through the base of Boombox's brain. In its vast, cauterized emptiness, the light of the warp shone through from behind the orc, filling the empty space with the roiling purple glow of its ruinous powers. I know how that hole feels, Space Marine. It maddens you, knowing something's not there that should be. You see, we orcs are simple things. We live to kill, and we love to kill. I don't love killing anymore, Space Marine. My blood doesn't run with the ecstasy of war. I still have my rage. I still have my thirst for battle. But the satisfaction is gone. Every kill just reminds me of how purposeless it all is. Do you feel that too, Space Marine? Enough! Hardin smashed his fist against the glass. Tell me what you know of Captain Vex. What do you know of my sister? Boombox smiled. There was something cold about it, as though it wasn't a genuine display of joy, but rather the widening of a knife blade, primed to cut deep into anything other than flesh. I know the very mention of her name hurts you just as much as any bullet, Space Marine. And if I can't get my kicks from shooting you, then maybe that'll have to do. Hardin pulled back for a moment, just long enough to notice the tiny crack that had formed in the heavy glass beneath his fist. He hadn't realized it, but his hand had met the exact space where the orc had been idly scratching. The Space Marine's wrath and the minuscule chipping on the other side of the glass was just enough to weaken it. Just enough. Boombox thrust his fist through the thick glass of the prison's wall. Its resistance was only just enough to stop the orc's arm from cleaving Hardin's head clean from his shoulders. The transhuman fell back hard, his robes providing little protection against the steel floor of the ship. Instantly, Captain Cypress drew her auto pistol, firing a volley of rounds into the beast's chest. They landed hard, barely piercing its skin, so the guardsman took a chance on firing a round into the beast's skull. Her aim was dead accurate, and her bullet did little more than scratch the glass of the porthole behind the orc. Before the human even had a chance to die, Hardin leapt towards the orc, pulling little more than a blade from his belt. The glass that separated man and Xenos alike from the void was tempered enough to hold back the crushing emptiness of space, but subjecting it to a stray shot from his bolt pistol was risky, especially in the warp. The two exchanged blows, thumping into each other's flesh with fists bound. The blade of the Space Marine found no purchase in the greenskin's flesh. Cypress stood shocked. It was as though the orc was defending itself, rather than lashing out with reckless abandon. All she could do was stand there, stunned at the inhuman display of force before her. In a green-tinged blur, Boom Box grabbed the Astartes by the waist and charged him into the wall of the ship, a sickening crunch of impact filling the chamber. Two green fists slammed into Hardin's chest before the orc leapt from the ground and slammed both of his steel-capped feet into the Space Marine's stomach. They launched across the floor as though the wall had merely been level ground and Boom Box had merely jumped from a standing position. Hardin slipped to the floor, his forelungs drained of wind, if only for a moment. He could feel the robes on his back dripping with warm blood. The wretched beast must have landed a claw in there somewhere, somehow. He hadn't even seen it happen. His head whipped towards Boom Box. The orc was on the ground just the same, writhing and laughing, of all things. "There's nothing!" it screamed, mania clogging its throat more than mirth. "No matter how many bastards I kill, I still don't feel a thing." Hardin spat, gritting his teeth as he rose. "You haven't killed me yet, you monster," he seethed, clutching the blade in his hands. Boom Box staggered to their feet in turn. "No," they hissed, staring with their one good eye. "But I got her pretty good." Hardin looked confused for a moment before his mind ran to the wet warmth running down his spine. He had no idea how the beast had managed to draw blood from behind him, until he turned to stare at the space in the wall where Captain Cypress had once stood. The space that Boom Box had pinned and slammed the half-ton transhuman against. The space that no living creature made of biological flesh could have survived standing in. A single moment of shock was all the orc needed. They slammed their fists into the back of the Space Marine's head, sending Hardin Vex colliding with the floor. He lay there, gore seeping through the thin space between his lips. The force of the blow was enough to shatter steel, but to the Astartes' skull, it was a blow that left his eyes staring up at the looming creature, phasing in and out of view. "Anna," Hardin breathed, grasping a hand at his belt. "You will tell me that she's still alive?" Boom Box hissed, planting a boot on the Astartes' arm before he could reach for his bolt pistol. "Because that's what you still believe, isn't it? I could tell you that, Space Marine, but would you believe me? You see, that's the difference between you and me. You believe. You choose to believe in the life of your sister. You believe in the word of your dead Emperor. I don't believe, Space Marine. I know. I know what's become of your precious little sister. I know the fact that you don't tears you up inside. And I know I'm gonna walk out of your ship, killing everyone I see. I know I'm gonna steal a drop pod, crash it out of the warp, and land on a planet you'll never find. I know this, Space Marine, because it'll hurt you far more than killing you. I know this because I need it to be true. Because if killing you on the outside won't bring me joy anymore, then killing you on the inside will have to do." With little more than brute force and a steel-toed boot, the world of Hardin Vex went black. The cruelest part of all, he could feel that it would not be forever. It didn't take long for Boom Box to retrieve his weapon from the adepts that were studying it. It took even less time to pry their metal hands from its frame. Before too long, the hallways of the Fist of Peace would ring out in a chorus of gunshots, commands, and screams of pain. It was the screams that rang the loudest. and nowhere amongst them was the bellowing war cry all who'd faced the Orks had come to know. Through the carnage that followed, Boombox the Bleak never once opened his mouth to roar. So anyway, that's his deal.